the title that he picked up for, what was it, $2.5 million? Yeah, he's pretty good.
So are 2 kings, and so is Chris Brewer. Oh, come on. Is this real life?
Welcome to the table, Kulev.
He just had 2 empty racks in his hand. He's not even situated yet. And Brewer is going to get ironed out. These are deep stacks.
He won't be smiling when this one shows down.
And remember, Kulev, Jonathan Jaffe was in the booth with us, and he said he's kind of one of those guys that gets frisky. He's got a little reputation on him, and that invites even more so playing a big one and maybe thinking we can win it pre for Brewer.
I was just about to say that. Kulev is the guy you will want to 4-bet for value of 2 kings and expect a lot of action. This is just a cold, cold deck.
In this episode of Weekly Poker Hand, we have a rough spot for one of these 2 players. We have a hand from the $125,000 buy-in Triton Poker Main Event. The action folds around to Chris Brewer, one of the absolute best poker players in the world. I am thrilled and honored to have him as a coach at pokercoaching.com. If you want one from him, make sure you check out pokercoaching.com. He raises it up to 2 big blinds, playing 10,000, 20,000 with a 20,000 ante, playing roughly 50 big blinds deep effective with pocket kings and the low jack seat. That's good. Alex Kulev just rebought, or just bought in for the first time. He gets dealt aces on his first hand. Aces against kings. Can you believe it? He makes it 120K. Back around to Chris Brewer. Let's see how he proceeds.
$320.
It gets back around to Chris Brewer, and he puts in the 4-bet to 320K out of his 1 million chip stack effective, about a third of his stack. This may seem like he's completely doomed. He's going to lose all of his money every single time. And, well, he probably is unless he improves. You may say, what other hands would want to 4-bet in this spot, though? Shouldn't you call and slow play? And the answer is absolutely not. This is a spot where if you have aces, kings, maybe some queens, maybe some ace-king suited, maybe some hands like jacks and tens, it is fine to put in a small 4-bet and then just simply not fold. You may then say, if you're only 4-betting your best hands, aren't you going to be easy to play against? And the answer would be yes. So you have to make sure you fit in some bluffs too. Some logical bluffs in this spot are going to be hands like a few low ace-x suiteds, maybe some king-x suiteds like king 10, king 9, king 8, and then some hands like ace-jack offsuit, ace-10 offsuit, stuff like that. So hands that have blockers to your opponent's continuing range, which is primarily aces, kings, and ace-king. You're going to want all of your bluffs, or at least the vast majority of your bluffs, to have an ace or a king in them. Let's see how Kulev proceeds.
There's actually merit for Kulev to call to 4-bet, just given, he's got pocket aces. If his opponent is bluffing, he can maybe pick up some chips post-flop. And if his opponent's got kings or queens, if it doesn't come ace high, he's going to stack them anyways.
Oh, man. 4-bet to 320. Extra 200 flatted. We know once Kulev is willing to put a third of his newly arrived stack into this pot, it's supposed to have a narrow range.
It's definitely not going to be dust, I'll tell you that.
Kulev decides to slow play his pocket aces, and this may be surprising to a lot of people, but it is definitely the game theory optimal play. The hands that want to rip it all in this scenario are pretty much only kings, some queens, some jacks, some tens, ace-king, and as a bluff, ace-5 suited. You may say, is your range a little bit too weak because it doesn't contain aces? No, it has all the kings. Kings are very, very good, as is ace-king. So what does the calling range look like? A lot of people get very uncomfortable in this scenario. I used to get very uncomfortable in this scenario where I'd 3-bet, perhaps a little bit wide, and get 4-bet because, well, we're now playing for a lot of money. The hands that want to call are aces every single time, and then some queens, jacks, tens, all the smaller pairs if you happen to have 3-bet them, which I'm really not 3-betting hands like 7s, 6s, and 5s all that often, but in the game theory optimal world, you may do that a little bit. And then ace-queen offsuit, that's a hand that does still get to call and stick around. And then a lot of your suited Broadway hands that opted to 3-bet, like ace queen suited, ace jack suited, king jack suited, king 10 suited, jack 10 suited, stuff like that. A few of the low suited aces can also call, like ace 9 suited, ace 5 suited if you decide to not go all in with it, ace 4 suited. And then your junkier hands fold, like ace 7 suited, queen 9 suited, 10-8 suited, stuff like that. So this is a spot where you do need to get comfortable calling with a wider range than only the nuts, and you also don't want to play shove or fold, which is what a lot of people do in this spot. Get comfortable going to the flop, and make sure your range is protected by including the pocket aces, which is exactly what Kulev does.
Oh my.
Oh boy. Kings full for Brewer. This is dreamy. And he goes from being in awful shape to being in wonderful shape. C-betting here. Kulev is just destroyed.
Just wow.
150K of what would otherwise have seemed doomed soldiers from the Brewer platoon now march forward with great confidence.
The flop comes king of clubs, 4 of clubs, 4 of hearts. Chris Brewer went from being in horrible shape to really, really good shape. He has a whopping 91% equity. He continuation bets 7.5 big blinds with his top set. And this is a spot where a lot of people make the mistake of automatically checking with their super duper nuts. But in game theory optimal world, which is again where we are living in this hand because we are playing, or at least watching a hand featuring 2 of the absolute best poker players in the world, you're going to want to bet frequently using roughly a 7.5 big blind bet. You could perhaps also get away with a tinier bet, but this is a spot where you want to bet everything because Brewer's range is literally aces, which is really good, kings, which is really good, ace king, which is really good, and then some, call it weaker hands like queens, jacks, tens, which are still pretty good, as well as some bluffs with stuff like king X suited, which is really good, and then a few total bluffs at this point, like ace jack, ace 7, ace 2 suiteds. So, those are no good. You do get to have some bluffs in your range. This is a spot where he does go small, and then Kulev should call with pretty much his entire continuing range at this point, because he doesn't want to raise, because when he does raise and get called, he's usually going to be in very, very bad shape. Perhaps he could sneak in some raises with some random top pairs, but this is a situation where he's going to want to call with everything in his continuing range because Brewer has a big nut advantage with the best hands in his range, at least, like aces and kings and ace king. So you don't want to do a whole lot of shoving. In scenarios where both players have some nuts, but if you are against the nuts, you're just dead, you don't do much raising at all as a default. Let's go to the turn.
Kulev flatting and picking up the nut flush draw on the turn as well. Look at Brewer with a little look back like the flush draw is relevant.
He knows exactly what he's got.
Sure.
I actually expect him to check a lot here. To not invite hero folds from, like, say, queens or jacks. If he bets once more, he will come in very small once again.
200.
Is it going to look like an ace-king in spite of the blocking attributes of aces for Kulev?
It does look like ace-king. Yes, he's got blocking hand, a hand that blocks that, but it's not improbable that your opponent has ace-king.
The turn is the 6 of clubs. This does not change anything for Chris Brewer, except for now maybe it gives Kulev some hope if he has the ace of clubs, or the queen of clubs, or the jack of clubs, even though it is no hope. Chris Brewer continues betting, and this is a spot where he can mix it up in game theory optimal world between checking and betting, because when you continuation bet everything on the flop, which Chris Brewer probably would do, you can no longer bet everything on the turn because your range contains all of your bluffs, whereas Kulev would have folded out his complete garbage on the flop. So Kulev's range gets a whole lot stronger once he does call even a small flop continuation bet. So Brewer needs to check some hands, and when you are checking some hands, you need to protect your checking range by including some super duper nuts that you know you are never folding once the stacks start to get somewhat shallow in relation to the pot. And here the stacks are 560K with roughly $1 million in the pot. So stacks are super duper shallow. So this is a spot where Brewer certainly could check the kings, but he decides to go for the tiny bet, 200K. Let's see how Kulev proceeds.
He does also hold that ace of clubs, so it's not like he's getting attacked by the nut flush draw. But with the club in hand, the default is to call. I think if he had red aces, he might jam this turn, but this seems right.
Kulev gives it some thought, finds the call, which is definitely reasonable. He could go all in if he felt inclined, but this is a spot where I think calling is going to be quite nice because it forces Brewer to stay in the pot with all of his bluffs. We'll talk about those more on the next betting round.
So 200K bet and called, and now a queen on the river of clubs, of course. Kulev has a nut flush draw, but I have to imagine he is wary of a little bit of king, king, queen, queen even. Not sure how much the queens would be performing in this manner up to this point, Randy, but obviously if we face a barrel when we hold the ace of clubs, what the heck is across the way?
I actually think Brewer might check here because the ace of clubs will always give him action in form of a jam, and maybe he can get his opponent to turn his hand to a bluff. Unless he's jamming to try to get called by jacks.
The river is the queen of clubs. Chris Brewer puts Kulev all in for 360K into the 1.4 million pot. Obviously, Chris Brewer's going to jam this hand. But what I want to know is what bluffs / worse hands than a flush do you think Chris Brewer could reasonably have that would 4-bet preflop, bet the flop, bet the turn, and then jam the river? And do you think Chris Brewer has the courage to do it? Take a second, think about it, and let me know in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, click the like and subscribe button. This is a very abnormal spot because a lot of Brewer's hands end up with the nuts or the effective nuts by the river. And also, on top of that, the stack to pot ratio is so short to the point that you can't really go around folding a whole lot unless it has literally no potential whatsoever. And the thing is that Brewer's range at this point contains only hands that have some potential. In fact, the worst hands he can have to some extent are pocket aces. And, you know, aces for a tiny bet is okay. And if you do shove the aces, you could reasonably get called by ace king at this point because, again, at that point, Kulev's going to be getting such amazing odds. So in game theory optimal world, Brewer has almost no potential bluffs. The ones that make some sense are a few ace X suited that do not have a flush. And then perhaps a hand like ace jack if you decided to really get after it and bluff the turn with no club, but you shouldn't be doing that you should not be doing that all that often. So it's really hard to find bluffs for Chris Brewer. That said, if he does go all in, Kulev has a pot odds problem when he doesn't even have a flush, when he has a hand like aces with no club. Brewer with his hand, though, of course, has super duper easy all in. He puts it in. Let's see if Kulev finds the call.
Yeah, you hear Kulev instantly say, I don't know what's going on. Did he just make the call? He did.
He did. Show him the aces.
How dirty is this?
Of course, Kulev finds a call with the ace high flush. He's sent packing on his very first hand of a $125,000 buy-in tournament. He has to try again next time.